So what I'm going to do is talk you through the steps for administration. So the first is, it's a pretty static population, give or take a few here or there. It's a static population for the most part. Now here's the good part that we put up there, is think about the frameworks. Think about how they can guide what you're doing, where you're going. This is not an action step when it comes to assessing. It's just saying these are out here. Here are some progression documents. Here are some learning frameworks. Take a look. Okay. Again, when you come down to selecting the correct assessment, if you remember and you look at the page or when you see it, the frameworks are up top. The frameworks are content area. It's all of math. It's a learning progression for math, all of English language arts. But when it comes down, I need to find the grade 4 set of performance tasks for Leslie. And those have my content area. Those have math and ELA. So that's your next piece. So we talked through this one, but it's again kind of calling out, what do I actually want to know? At this level, I want to know the student's ability to differentiate between straight lines and curvy lines. And this here is going to tell me how to do it. 4th grade English language arts. What do I want to do? I want to identify a student's ability to identify differences between two representations of a story. Okay. So in a video, what's the difference between the video and the story we read? And at a more initial level, what's the same? Well, there's a hare in both. There's a tortoise in both. And the tortoise wins the race in both. Again, this is the big one. Change isn't easy. A new system certainly isn't easy. But again, I maintain change is good. If not, we'd also be like riding horses to work and writing with quills. So I think that change is really important. But the first year, especially if it's a whole big change, will be harder. But I think a lot of the work comes in looking at where we're teaching, is looking through with you and your colleagues in places, what are we teaching? What do we have laid out this year? Where are the places that they do tag in? And there's probably a good load of them. No matter what standards you're teaching, you've always been teaching a great deal of math and a great deal of English language arts. It's embedded in different activities, different places. You may not have had it called out for you or structured or how you're going to measure it, but you're doing this robust thing of work with your kids for years. It's just how do these things fit together and how do you now have a way to pick up that data? So that's, I think, where the work is going to be. Okay, so again, taking a look, this is 3rd grade English language arts. So again, reminding you, this is the window. I pull up this slide here so you can take a look. So your baseline is your gatekeeper. It lets you know what do we know. Okay. So these 6-week bars are letting you know that if you wanted to do literature all in the fall, you can do this on a standard by standard basis. Okay. If I decided that I just wanted to, we were doing stories and stories and stories, and I wanted to just tackle this, either with one kid or with a group of kids, I could just do this in the fall, as long as there's 6 weeks between my baseline and my final. So I could just do this. If I wanted to start foundational skills, because I knew all year long, to my students' IEP, it's something we'll be doing across the board, I could just start foundational skills, get a baseline, which should help me. I mean, the idea of a baseline is it should help you teach. You have to get a baseline somewhere for your baseline. I want to start this in November, and I want to not pick up my final measure until April 8th. You don't have to. And anywhere in between. So a standard by standard basis, as long as there's 6 weeks in between them. You also could decide you're going to do the whole darn thing. You're going to start in February, right? And see where your skills baseline, your kids' baseline skills are in February after months and months of teaching, and then pick them up 6 weeks later. You could do that, right? But you probably want to start in the fall or the early winter to just see, hey, where are we? So you can use this as really an instructional driver, which is the point, right? Determining the complexity piece. So if you want to just take a look at one of your performance task pieces, we can just kind of eye this together. So I'm just looking at the one on page 18. It's ratio and proportional relationships. So again, you will judge standard by standard basis within an entire content area. It's going to be your professional judgment, obviously, right? Your baseline provides a check. Always look at the intermediate level first, even if it's 6 seconds, because you know where your student's going. It's like our anchor. So if I'm looking at this, I would first go to, students can identify a model of a given simple ratio. Have we done anything, whether we've used the term ratio or not? And if you still need some clarification as to what that would look like, well, you've got the clarification here in the documents. I know what that would look like, right? Because I have a setup here. Have my students ever done something like this, either of these? And if so, if I have some idea that a student can do this and we can teach to that, that might be the right place to go. Okay. So what does my student already know? And if it's nothing, that's okay. It's how we know to teach it. What kind of skills are associated with it? A couple of questions I've been asked. One of them has been thinking back perhaps to the measurement and data one. We haven't talked a lot about length, but we're going to. And knowing what I know about this student, as soon as we start talking about the concept, I know that they'll be able to kind of do. Right? They'll be able to be in that utilization space at that top access point framework. They're going to be a 0 to start with because we haven't started measuring with rulers, but I know we're going to get there based on their skills. Can we be in the more complex at a 0 because we know that's the right space? Absolutely. Like, you have that professional judgment. You know your students. They're able to utilize similar concepts. You haven't learned how to use a ruler yet, but that doesn't mean that you're not going to be able to, right? You know how your students will learn. That's your judgment. I show you this map because this might look like a lot of students. You know, our students oftentimes have huge splinter skills, especially a lot of our kids on the spectrum. Huge. And that's fine. That's why you make a standard by standard judgment. I've often had students who might even have strong foundational reading skills. They might be highly verbal. However, they might have really large deficits in processing, right? Or temporal order sequencing. And so in one space, they might be able to either pull words off a page, right? Or read some simple sight words. But we're really, really struggling even with a basic concept of identifying text or even producing a simple example of something that happened to them. That's fine. Those are individual judgments, and children, especially in our population, are all over the place usually. And that's fine. Okay. So once you've done that, you're going to review the specifications of performance tasks. And that's just, again, to give you an idea of saying, I'm not sure what we really know about ratios. I don't know what that would look like. So then you can take a look at the performance task documents, go, okay, yeah, that's where it's at. That's what we know or don't know. That's eventually how we'll pick up our measure. But that helps me understand. This graphic just reminds you of the association. So here's our ratio and proportional relationships. It's the one you have. If I look at, okay, we realize identifying a model of a given simple ratio, oh, that's what we're doing. That feels right. This is associated always with the access point there and the requirements. So determining which example to use as guidance. You're going to know your students, right? You will know if the best example would be to actually measure, to give options for what length something is. Review the teacher directions, the directions to the student, right? And then there's directions to teachers in paren, which you may or may not find to be useful. And then consider individual student needs. We jumped into end grade a little bit. And we can jump into it a little bit more if you like. Okay. But you're really going to get into this. You're going to get your hands dirty and you're going to soup with it. And I think you're going to find out, again, those things really dovetail. That should really, really facilitate this experience. Because that's where it's all going to sit. If you are madly in love with portfolio binders and printing and shipping things, I hate to break your heart. You're done with that. So it will all sit there. And it's really nice because it feels really portable. Like when I've played with it in a friend's classroom, it sits there, right? It comes with you. It sits there. I was talking to a gentleman in Spokane, and he was thinking and kind of planning out, and we were doing a little brainstorming afterwards about, he was going, and I was like, oh, bold man, on a sort of outdoors field trip with his students, and thinking there's a science standard where students are identifying a tool that will solve a problem. And the example put out, he said, oh my God, this is a great example, is I need to take water with me on the trip. Would I use a water bottle or like a lunch pail? And he's going, okay, this is great. We're going to need to pack up some things. This will fit right into, I know we're doing a field trip. Okay? So these sort of things as he's starting to look at it and feel like, okay, I see these. This is set up. Okay, I don't have to figure this out. Great. I need to take my lunch. Am I going to use a lunch box or a water bottle? He went so far as he was saying funny things about using bathrooms on buses. I was like, oh boy. So it is a tool, and I see very fancy buses, but you know. So he's just starting to think about, okay, this doesn't feel crazy. This feels logical, and this is where it can sit together. Okay. And then he thought, can I go in and he started programming these things? And he said, yeah, I could even take a tablet with me and capture some of that data, and then I'm not toggling back and forth. I said, yeah, you totally could. Okay, so we talked through this a little bit, and again, I can go through and I can do another one, but this idea of 5 items was, you saw me do it a couple times. I gave 5 items to a student, 5 measurement items of, I'm either going to measure 5 different things, or I'm going to have 5 different questions as to what of these instruments lined up will measure the length of this, right? Or this, or something else. There are 5 different really questions we think about. What are 5 different questions about this story, identifying a story element? Is it, can you tell me 2 of the characters? 2 things about the setting. What happened? Did he knock over the castle? Did the waves wash it away? We're talking about items. That's what we're talking about. Okay. Data is entered into ungraded system, and we have that observer attestation piece that goes with it. Okay. I put this in here, and it's a little bit of a segue. Next conversation is, it is in page 16. It is from Washington Sensory Disabilities. I love this graphic because it reminds me and reminds everybody else that there are so many ways that our children tell us what they know. Okay. It is across a huge spectrum. Body language and facial expressions? Absolutely. All the way up to students who produce written word. And everywhere in between. Some of our students use object clues, touch clues, object schedules, right? For some of our students with low vision. Picture schedules, spoken language. Sometimes our students use fully formed words. Sometimes they're sounds that we know have associations. Sometimes they're sounds that we're trying to learn to associate with things, right? But they're across the board. And I put this in as a reminder that we will know what our students know, how they choose to tell us or how they can tell us. So again, adaptations is how we're making this work for each kiddo and on each space. Presentation. What am I using? Am I using picture cards? Am I using actual objects? Are we using it on an iPad? Are we using pictures paired with words? What story are we using? Okay. Am I asking questions? Am I asking the student to make a response? Okay, 75% is our gatekeeper. It is a statistical gatekeeper because if you know out of 5 problems, you cannot get 75%. But it's a cutoff. So if we have increments of 20, if a student gets more than 3 out of 5 correct on a baseline, your response is amazing. You know this. Let's work on a more difficult skill. Okay. It's truly supposed to be a baseline of how much your students know and can do on a particular skill. Okay. If a student knows 0 on any level, that's also fine. There's not a downward gatekeeper. It's just an upward gatekeeper to make sure we are pushing students to the more complex space. I've had this question come up, which is, what do I do if it's the most complex level and my kid is getting all of the answers correct? So the first question is, sir, are you leading the witness kind of thing? Are we presenting a space where the child is really easy to take cues from us as to what the correct answer is, which sometimes we just do naturally from our teaching? Or do we need to make it more difficult? So for example, if I think about that measurement question and I'm providing the options, is it 3 inches, 4 inches, 5 inches? Maybe the student actually needs to measure themselves. So if really it's the proper assessment decision that they should be in this population, think about your presentation. Okay, I don't have to tell you too much about this. Again, the idea is hopefully with a really nice setup is your baseline will tell you what's going on. Right? It'll just tell you what's going on. Where are we at? What do we need to do? Okay. Your final performance task. When I say items must be unique, you're not going to read the same Henry at the Beach story, because we might have remembered Henry at the Beach. We might use another 3-line story and ask about characters and ask about setting, because we're measuring the same thing. Right? If I was doing this setup here, I probably would be asking a student, if before I was asking them about length of school supplies, I would probably switch that up and ask them which tools would be used to measure the length of, I'm not going to take off my shoe, but you get the idea, right? Something different. Okay, and then submitting it. The window will close April 10th, and assessments will just be uploaded.